Here is the hard to swallow reason why you and I choose to stay stuck and suffer rather than change. Not because we lack information, not because we have too little motivation, and definitely not because we are not disciplined enough. We don't change because in the moment, staying where we are still feels less painful than doing what change requires. It is the trap of the familiar, and the familiar has a very strong pull. So, that is actually an ugly thing to admit. Because if I keep avoiding something I say is important, it means that I am lying to myself. I am negotiating my way out of the thing I claim to want by exaggerating the pain, effort, and discomfort change will demand from me. That is very easy to spot when you see it in someone else, and it is much harder to admit when you see it in yourself. So here is the story. A friend of mine is a registered dietitian, and recently she told me a story about one of her clients. I couldn't get it out of my mind. So the client failed the eating plan. Well, that happens. What bothered me was how quickly the explanation arrived from the client. So this young girl in her 20s, overweight and deeply unhappy with her body, according to her, and very clear that she wants to take control of her eating habits and lose weight. The plan my friend gave her was not extreme. Record everything you eat in a week and reduce desserts from 7 to 1. Well, simple enough, at least on paper. So 3 days later, the food log from the client arrives. In those 3 days, she had chocolate, ice cream, and a lot of sweet fruit. At the next appointment, my friend asked the obvious question, so what happened? We agreed on one dessert per week and I counted at least 5. Well, the answer lasted almost 15 minutes. Life was unfair. She was stressed. Healthy eating was impossible because the big supermarket was not next door. By the time my friend finished telling me the story, I felt a wide range of emotions, and some of them were not very flattering. Oh, for God's sakes, said my inner drill sergeant. You're in your 20s. This should be the strongest, healthiest, most energetic chapter of your life. Nobody else can eat differently for you. Nobody else can change your life for you. If you sit in a dietitian's office explaining why none of this is your responsibility, what exactly are you expecting to happen? The conversation with my friend was over, but my brain refused to let go. I went walking with the dog between the fields, which is where I usually do my best thinking. And the reaction inside me kept growing. First anger, then frustration, then resentment, and eventually sadness. Sadness that so many women, regardless of age or goal, seem willing to accept a life they clearly do not want. And then I had to look at myself, which I always do. Strong emotions usually tell me something important, but not always about the other person. Often, they point back right at me. I realized I was not judging that young woman because she had failed. I was judging her because I was terrified of ever becoming her, terrified of slowly letting go of the habits that keep me healthy, capable, and independent, terrified of waking up one day and realize that I had quietly negotiated myself into a life I never wanted. And then came the uncomfortable question. Am I really different? I might be good at reaching physical and nutritional goals, I said for myself, but what about the things that seem impossible for me to do, even when they are important and necessary? So take German, for example. I know with my whole brain how important it is for me to learn it. Language is freedom, language is confidence, language is being able to express who I really am. I deliberately built an AI language tutor for myself. I created realistic goals. I reduced the sessions to half an hour. I removed most of the excuses. I set it up exactly the way a sensible person would set it up. And yet, every single time it is time to start, I dread opening my laptop. Sometimes I deliberately leave it in another room so I do not even have a look at it. And suddenly, I become very interested in doing absolutely anything, including cleaning the house, which I usually hate. Another example is even more stupid. I had an intense day, chores, dog walking, ironing, and jiu-jitsu still waiting for me in the evening. By the end of the day, I was exhausted. Then I remembered I still had to wait and portion the dog's food for the next week. 10 minutes. That is all it takes. I was already in the kitchen, and yet my brain immediately started negotiating. And this small task suddenly felt enormous. This is where something clicked. The young woman was not really struggling with desserts, and I was not really struggling with German. I was not really struggling with dog food portioning. We were both struggling with the same invisible moment, the few seconds before doing something we know is good for us and important. For a long time, I did not even notice that moment. It appeared before something important and before something completely trivial. Before opening my laptop, before preparing the dog's food, before training, different situations, same feeling. So eventually, I realized there was a pattern. Whatever happened in those few seconds inside my head almost always predicted what happened next. So naturally, I reached for the first explanation. It is a motivation thing. Maybe that young woman was not motivated enough. Maybe despite everything she said, losing weight simply was not important enough to her. After all, motivation is what gets us moving, right? Well, except it's not. Because I know exactly how important German is to me. I do not need anyone to convince me. I convince myself every single day, and yet I still avoid opening the laptop. So, motivation was not the answer. The second explanation felt much more comfortable: discipline. That one suited my ego rather nicely. I see myself as a disciplined person. When something truly matters, I get my act together and just do it. Simple. Which also made it very easy to look at other people and think, well, maybe you are not just disciplined enough. Oh, such a flattering theory. Unfortunately, also not true. Then came information. Maybe that is why the young woman went to a dietitian in the first place. Maybe she didn't know enough yet. Maybe she needed another explanation, another meal plan, another breakthrough. Except that does not survive reality either. We do not suffer from a lack of information anymore. We suffer from its abundance. Nutrition, exercise, sleep, language learning, strength training, investing, psychology. Open your phone and thousands of people will tell you exactly what to do and how to do it. So if information were enough, we would be millionaires walking around with six packs, right? Clearly, information is not a bottleneck here. So I stopped looking for another grand explanation and started watching myself. Really watching myself. Every time I knew I had to do something important. And that is when I saw the chain. So first came awareness. I need to do my German lesson today, or I need to go to register for jiu-jitsu class, or I need to prepare dog's food, right? Then came resistance, not just in my head, in my whole body. My chest tightened, my shoulder tightened, I felt restless, irritated, almost angry. The first thought was usually some version of, why do I have to do this now? Then my inner lawyer arrived. Unfortunately, she's exceptionally good at her job. She never argues against my goals. She argues for postponing them. Well, you have already done enough today, aren't you? You are tired, you deserve a break. It can wait until tomorrow, right? And the scary part is that she is almost always very convincing. that was probably the biggest breakthrough for me. I stopped trying to win the argument because I almost never did. Instead, I learned to interrupt it. Not by thinking differently, but by acting before the negotiation reached its conclusion. People always often say, sorry, if you want to start exercising, you just need to put training shoes on. Well, that never worked for me. My shoes can stand lonely in the living room and I will happily walk past them without a flinch. Once I cross that line, the battle is over. Not because I suddenly become motivated, but because I am already in the process. At that point, stopping would actually require more effort than continuing. Once I became aware of that invisible moment, I stopped trying to get rid of it. The negotiation will come, the irritation will come, the self-pity will arrive. The voice asking, why do I have to do this, will come too. I do not treat that as a sign that something has gone wrong. I treat it as a part of the process. I acknowledge it and then I cross the line anyway. That became my rule. Not because I suddenly became mentally stronger, but because I stopped expecting those feelings to disappear before I acted. For repeating things like training, studying, writing, I no longer negotiate the action. The action has already been decided. The only thing left to negotiate is the intensity. If it is a jiu-jitsu, for example, and I am exhausted, I still go, but maybe I do not sprint through the warm-up. Maybe I warm up quietly in the corner and then just practice my techniques in a slow manner. The session does not have to be perfect. It simply has to happen. The same applies to German. Some days I have a solid 30-minute session. Some days I barely scrape through 15. Some days my brain feels like a cold porridge. Fine, I still crossed the line. That is the thing I am protecting. Small everyday jobs are slightly different. Preparing something, cleaning bathroom, emptying the dishwasher, those do not require real intensity. They simply require finishing. When the negotiation starts, I usually tell myself one sentence. That has to be done. Get it over with. Nobody else is coming to do it for you, right? One thing changed even more than my actions, the way I speak to myself. I stopped using labels. I do not tell myself I am procrastinating or I am a procrastinator. Those words quietly become part of your identity, which I absolutely refuse to do. Instead, I describe what is actually happening. Today, I am negotiating with myself. Today, I choose inaction. Tomorrow, I can choose differently. That sounds like a small language change. However, for me, it is not. It was the difference between judging myself and observing myself honestly. So, honesty is not beating yourself up. Honesty is a calling things by their real names. If I did not do my German lesson, I did not somehow fail. I chose not to do it. If I skip training, I chose not to train. Once I call it what it is, I keep something incredibly important, my ability to choose differently next time. And just to be clear, none of this means the conversations disappeared. I still have them. Sometimes they are tiny, sometimes they are loud enough to fill the room. I still get irritated, I still feel the heaviness, I still listen to my wonderfully persuasive inner lawyer making an excellent case for postponing absolutely everything. The difference is that I already know how the conversation ends. I have heard it hundreds of times before, so now I let my brain present its arguments, then I think for its opinion, and I start anyway.